The microphone screeched feedback as 3,000 people watched Marcus Webb rip a 6-year-old's drawing in half on the grand stage of Haverton Industries' annual investor showcase, and somewhere in the back row, a decorated 3-star general slowly rose to his feet with fire in his eyes. If you believe people deserve a second chance, and that kindness can change everything, smash that like button, drop a comment below, share this with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House. Now let's begin. Nathaniel Cross had not slept properly in 4 years. Not since his wife Renata passed away in a car accident on a rain-soaked highway outside Denver, leaving him alone to raise their daughter Joelle, who was 2 years old at the time and barely understood why mommy wasn't coming home. He worked nights as a maintenance technician at a manufacturing plant, and during the day, while Joelle was at school, he tinkered in his garage, building something he believed could change lives, a low-cost prosthetic hand designed for children, using lightweight materials and a sensor system he had developed himself, mostly self-taught through library books and late-night online courses he could barely afford. He had poured every spare dollar, every spare hour, every ounce of grief and love into that invention. Joelle used to sit on an overturned bucket in the garage, swinging her little legs, watching her father solder wires with the kind of awe only a child can give. "You're gonna help kids, Daddy," she would say, and he would smile through exhaustion because hearing her say that made the 18-hour days worth it. When Nathaniel finally got accepted to present his prosthetic design at Haverton Industries' prestigious investor showcase, an event broadcast live and attended by some of the wealthiest tech investors in the country, he thought it was the breakthrough he had been praying for. He spent his last $300 on a second-hand suit. Joelle, now 6, insisted on drawing him a picture for good luck. A crayon sketch of him standing on a stage with a giant gold star above his head, the words, "My daddy is a hero," scrawled across the top in her wobbly handwriting. He folded it carefully and placed it in his breast pocket like a talisman. The showcase floor was blinding with lights, expensive suits, and quiet money. Nathaniel stood backstage, his hands trembling, rehearsing his pitch one final time. When his name was called, he walked out holding his prototype, a modest plastic and metal hand that had taken him 4 years and thousands of hours to perfect. He began explaining the technology with genuine passion, how the sensors could read residual muscle movement, how the manufacturing cost was a fraction of existing prosthetics, how it could change the lives of children in underfunded hospitals and war-torn regions who could never afford the alternatives. Marcus Webb, the CEO of Haverton Industries, a man known for his expensive watches and his crueler-than-necessary public critiques, interrupted him within 90 seconds. He walked onto the stage uninvited, plucked the prosthetic hand from Nathaniel's grip, and turned it over with a theatrical smirk. "This looks like something a community college dropout glued together in his garage," he said, and the room rippled with uncomfortable laughter. Nathaniel's face burned, but he pressed forward, trying to explain the engineering behind it, when Webb's eyes landed on the folded paper sticking from his breast pocket. Before Nathaniel could stop him, Webb snatched it out, unfolded Joelle's drawing, and held it up to the crowd like a punchline. "Oh, this is beautiful," he said mockingly, "a crayon drawing telling Daddy he's a hero. Folks, this is who's asking us to invest millions. A single dad with a garage hobby and his daughter's homework." The audience laughter grew louder, sharper, and something inside Nathaniel cracked. Webb tore the drawing cleanly in half, letting the pieces flutter to the stage floor, and tossed the broken prosthetic hand carelessly aside as if it were garbage. "Next presenter," he announced, already walking away, already dismissing 4 years of a grieving father's love and labor in under 2 minutes. Nathaniel stood frozen, staring at the torn halves of his daughter's drawing on the floor, his throat tight, his vision blurred, the humiliation so total that for a moment he forgot how to breathe. He bent down slowly to gather the pieces with shaking hands, and that was the exact moment a voice cut through the stunned silence of the auditorium like a blade. "Sit down, Webb." Every head turned. General Augustus Reyes, a decorated 3-star general with 31 years of military service, sat in the audience as a guest of honor, invited because Haverton Industries supplied equipment contracts to the Department of Defense. He rose from his seat with the unmistakable authority of a man who had commanded soldiers through real danger, his voice carrying without need of a microphone. I have spent 3 decades watching young men and women lose limbs defending this country, the general said, his eyes locked on Webb. I have visited children's hospitals in Kandahar and in field clinics where 6-year-olds wear prosthetics that cost more than this man's annual salary, prosthetics that break, that they outgrow within months because nobody designs them affordably. And you just tore apart, on this stage, the first piece of technology one have seen in years that actually solves that problem. The room had gone utterly silent. Webb opened his mouth to respond, but the general wasn't finished. He walked down the aisle, climbed the stage steps himself, and knelt down beside Nathaniel, helping him gather the torn pieces of Joel's drawing with hands that had once carried wounded soldiers off battlefields. "Son," he said quietly, only loud enough for Nathaniel and the nearest microphone to catch, "what's your daughter's name?" "Joel," Nathaniel managed, his voice cracking. "Joel is right," the general said, standing back up and facing the entire room, holding up the broken prosthetic hand Webb had discarded. "Her daddy is a hero. Do you know what heroism actually looks like? It doesn't look like a $5,000 suit mocking a man's grief on a stage. It looks like a father working night shifts, raising a daughter alone, and spending every spare hour trying to give some child somewhere a hand to hold a pencil, to hold a baseball, to hold their mother's hand again." His voice rose, filling the silent room. "I've buried soldiers younger than this man. I've watched mothers receive folded flags instead of their sons. And I have never once seen courage that humiliates a struggling man in front of thousands of people for entertainment." Webb, pale now, tried to interject that it was simply business, simply due diligence on an investment, but the general cut him down without raising his voice further, simply by stating flatly that Haverton Industries defense contracts would be reviewed personally by his office, and that he would be recommending the Department of Defense's Prosthetics Innovation Grant, worth $4 million, be redirected entirely toward Nathaniel Cross's research, effective immediately, pending verification of the technology, which he had no doubt would succeed. The auditorium that had laughed minutes earlier now erupted into stunned applause, and investors who had smirked at Nathaniel's second-hand suit suddenly stood, phones out, suddenly desperate to be associated with whatever this was becoming. But Nathaniel barely heard any of it. He stood holding the torn pieces of his daughter's drawing against his chest, tears finally falling freely, not from humiliation anymore, but from something closer to disbelief, the strange dizzying feeling of watching 4 years of quiet, lonely devotion suddenly seen, suddenly valued, by a stranger who understood sacrifice in a way Marcus Webb never could. General Reyes placed a firm hand on Nathaniel's shoulder and said something that would later be replayed in news segments around the world. "I didn't stand up for your invention, son. I stood up because no man who builds something out of love for his child deserves to be torn down by someone who's never built anything out of love for anyone." Within 6 months, Nathaniel's prosthetic design entered clinical trials at 3 children's hospitals. Within a year, it was being manufactured for distribution in conflict zones and underfunded clinics across 4 continents, fundamentally changing the cost and accessibility of pediatric prosthetics. Marcus Webb resigned from Haverton Industries amid public backlash 3 weeks after the footage went viral, his cruelty immortalized in a 60-second clip that millions watched, but it was the moment after, the general kneeling to gather torn crayon paper, that people couldn't stop sharing. Joel, now 7, keeps a framed, carefully taped-together copy of that original drawing on her bedroom wall, beside a photograph of her father shaking hands with General Reyes at the grant ceremony. She still tells people, with the unshakable certainty only children possess, that her daddy is a hero, and now the whole world finally agrees with her. If this story touched your heart even a little, if it reminded you that kindness still has the power to rise up against cruelty, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us which part moved you most, and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Your support means more than you know, and it helps stories like this one reach the people who need them. Before we go, do me one small favor, type Joel in the comments if you believe every quiet, struggling parent deserves to be seen the way Nathaniel finally was. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.